Come on in. Everybody's coming in the room. We're so excited to have you. Welcome, welcome, everyone. As you're coming on in, feel free to throw where you are in the chat. We'd love to see where everybody is. Yeah, come on in. We'll get started in a moment.
Thanks for joining us on a Sunday. I think they'll really love this presentation. We'll just give everyone a minute to come in.
Yeah. Yeah. Take a moment, get your coffee or your tea, or if it's the evening for you, grab some yummy water, maybe some cucumber lime lemon water or something fun. A lemonade,
Morning
perhaps.
Here on the West Coast. I'm in the West Coast.
Yeah.
I've got my coffee. Yeah. What you got, AJ?
Yay. Oh, I have nothing. I'll pretend this is water. It's 7 p.m. where I am, and we just had dinner, so I am full and hydrated and ready for this presentation.
Water in a Mardi Gras cup.
Yes.
There you go.
There's the fun. That is great. Okay. And Dr. Henri, where are you at this day? Where are you?
I put it in the chat. I'm in St. Louis.
St. Louis. Nice.
St. Louis, Missouri, right in the middle of North America.
Smack dab in the middle. Great.
Well, actually, that's just poorly stating. I am in the middle of the United States of America, nowhere near the middle of North America. So I apologize.
I appreciate that, Zark, as a Canadian.
Right.
All right. Let's get rolling, shall we? Can you hear me okay, everybody?
Yeah, I think so.
Great. Okay. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Awesome. Well, welcome to our Salon on the Anxiety Continuum, hosted by Maka Health. My name is Dr. Mary Pines, and I'm the Chief Scientific Officer here at Maka. I'm here to introduce you to Maka and to welcome you to this safe learning space. Thank you so much for being here. We're excited to host you in learning about anxiety and how you can change your relationship to it. And before we start, just some really quick notes on Riverside, the platform we're using to present today. Firstly, Riverside keeps you anonymous. We will be recording the event, but neither you nor the chat will be recorded, so you will not be on video. If you want to ask a live question, the only thing identifying you will be your name. So if you want to change your name to maintain anonymity, please do feel free to do so. Second thing, if you're on your phone and in portrait mode, you might want to be in landscape instead, so the slides are bigger. So be sure to unlock your phone and flip it sideways. And last thing, if you have any questions, please just drop them in the chat on the right-hand side of your screen. We hope you enjoy this salon, and I look forward to speaking to you all at the end of the presentation. Please do stick around for questions. We have some good ones. And with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. AJ Volk, Maka Health's Member Experience Manager. Over
Hello,
to you,
everyone.
AJ.
We are so excited that you're here, and thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Makaverse. We're so excited that you're here to learn all things anxiety from Dr. Roca. It's June 19th, and I'm here as your co-host for the event. So welcome, welcome. For the next hour, we are going to be diving into a topic of anxiety. And so you have an idea of the layout for the event. We have a 45-minute presentation from Dr. Roca, and we're going to move into Q&A, like Dr. Mary said, where we'll take some questions from the registration link, and we'll have some live questions as well. And just to tell you a little bit more about Dr. Roca, he's a highly experienced physician and healer with 40 years of expertise. He's certified with the American Board of Family Medicine, American Board of Integrative Medicine, and the Institute for Functional Medicine. So lots of great stuff in there. Dr. Roca has served on the board of directors for several medical associations and co-created the Leadership and Education program for students in integrative medicine. Wow. His unique approach to well-being and optimal functioning is deeply rooted in the whole health perspective, which I'm sure we'll hear more about today. And he began his career actually as a massage therapist and mind and body practitioner. Dr. Roca has also worked extensively with the veterans at the Veterans Administration healthcare system to create a unique group-based approach to health. So Dr. Roca, amazing stuff. We're so excited that you're here, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
AJ, Mary, thank you so much. Today we're going to be talking about anxiety and anxiousness. And I tell you, every single person will experience this at least sometime in their life, and some will experience a lot. So we're going to talk about what it is, and then we're going to talk about how it relates to maybe some other diseases, how it works in your body, and some specific techniques that you can use to help reset yourself. So hopefully we're going to learn some specific things you can start doing immediately by the time we're done today. So the first thing to recognize is that it is part of this overall continuum of stress. So when you think about stress, there it is on the bottom, and performance going up the y-axis on the side, you can see that this idea of tension can help us reach our peak performance. So the idea that we may be really working on our edge, on our stress edge, is not necessarily a bad thing. Stress isn't necessarily a bad thing. However, when your stress level increases substantially, then all of a sudden the performance decreases, right? So you may start in a motivated place, get to a focused place to accomplish more than you think you might have been able to accomplish. But if that stays up too long, or if your resilience skills are not equal to that strain, then you become fatigued. And that's when anxiety can happen. That's when, if you have an anger demon, it can come out. And ultimately, it can lead to burnout and exhaustion as you move over there further to the right. That's when things really look more like depression. So when you talk about types of stress, there are just acute stresses. Big things happen and they don't stay around for long. You rise to that occasion. Maybe it gets into your body a bit, but then it passes on. Sometimes those things can occur sort of intermittently, but not once, but maybe several times over the course of months or years. And then there's chronic stress. That kind of stress that sits in and settles in, and sometimes we get used to it and we no longer even think that we're stressed. We just think this is life. But really, it's a state of chronic stress. Now, I'll tell you, you can have chronic stress with acute and periodic stress, with super stress, even more acute stress on top of that. And some people would say that describes our current life existence on the entire planet, especially in some Western countries. For example, climate stress is a chronic stress, being concerned about what's happening to the climate. Leadership or political stress is a common stress, and it is persistent and ongoing. And on top of that, there may be things happening in your relationship or in your work. And on top of that, there may be health issues that you have. So we can have, any one of us, chronic stress with this acute stress, with super stress on top of it. You can also get physical stress. And these are things that you may not, like mentally, emotionally, identify as stress. And this can be things like insomnia, or maybe diabetes, or inflammation that exists in the body, or some kind of a mechanical issue. Maybe it's surgery or an accident. And then there are those psychosocial stressors, which have to do with our expectations and time relative to who we think we should be and how we think we should be in the world. So when you look at this overall, again, healthy is over there on the left-hand side of your screen, where you can be resilient. You can rise to the occasion, and when that moment is gone, then you can let it all go. And then there can be places of reacting. And this is usually what happens with that chronic stress. You become irritable or nervous and maybe forgetful. A lot of people say, what's wrong with my memory? And what's wrong with the memory is that you have so many things on your mind. You really can't put any one thing into long-term memory. You're only putting the things that are emotionally charged into memory. So then you move over to where anxiety lives. And that's an injury. That's a diagnosis. And these kinds of things settle in, and it changes your perspective, and it changes the way that you interact with the world. And finally, you can get to the severe illness part of this. And that's when the anxiety gets so significant that it's really difficult to perform anything. It's really hard to see your way outside of that frame of reference. It is a continuum. So we're going to talk about the definition, because again, there is stress, there's anxiousness, and there's anxiety. And so the difference is between these temporary feelings of anxiousness and the more intense feelings of fear, worry, and anxiety. And the key thing is that it needs to happen more days than not for at least 6 months. And so that's the definition of transforming something from anxiousness into anxiety. Now, when you're in this place of anxiety, this place of fear or worry has happened more than 6 months, you need to have at least 3 of these symptoms. Again, more days than not for the past 6 months. Restlessness, keyed up, irritability, that internal kind of feeling on edge, feeling easily fatigued, having difficulty concentrating. This is where you might think that your memory is diminishing. That irritability or anger, it gets in your body, muscle tension, and especially in the muscles of your shoulder, your neck, and the lower part of your skull. So very often, anxiety is associated with muscle pain. So I'd like for us to do the first simple technique. So I want you to bring your shoulders up to your ears. Squinch them, squinch them, squinch them really hard. Squinch, 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 squinch. Take a deep breath in, and then drop them and sigh. Do it again. Squinch. And then as you exhale, drop them.
Nice.
And that's called the drop in.
That's
and
nice.
For some folks,
refreshing.
Reset them. Yeah,
Thank you.
Right in the moment, right?
Yeah.
You don't even know that you're feeling that tension because we put it there automatically. It is an automatic neurological consequence of anxiety. These muscles of our head and neck and our upper shoulders, we can think of them as our turtle shell, as our shield. It's a natural way that the body works to protect itself when it thinks it's stressed enough to be in danger. So it's not a bad thing to do that several times during the day because you don't even know that you're putting your anxiety into your body and getting that tension. Releasing it helps you say, oh yeah, okay, I guess that was happening. And then the idea of sleep disturbances. So you may have a hard time falling asleep or staying asleep. And if you wake up in the middle of the night, the mind may be racing and running, and it may be hard to get back to sleep. And then that these feelings of anxiety, worry, or physical symptoms cause enough distress that it gets in the way of living. So it's got to have at least 3 of those, more days than not, for the past 6 months to go from the place of anxiousness, difficulty being resilient to stress, to something that is becoming more of a pattern of behavior, a pattern of neurological existence, and that would be anxiety. So there's a number of different ways. There you go. There's a number of different anxiety disorders, and the most common one is generalized anxiety disorder. It's just about anxiety and worry over different kinds of events. But then again, you get these symptoms and it gets in the way of your life. Now, if that gets really bad, it's panic disorder. And that's when your heart races and you feel like you're going to die, that sense of impending doom. This is when folks feel like maybe they're having a heart attack, but it's really anxiety. It's getting into their hormonal and neurological system and causing the heart to race. One of the things I want to point out is separation anxiety, because often the first clue that somebody may have a tendency toward anxiety that may be genetic is when during childhood it becomes really difficult to incorporate new situations, especially new situations with other adults or even other children, and you really attach very closely to your parents. So that separation from attachment that happens in childhood could be an indication to work really, really hard with your child around stress resiliency issues so that they would be able to be resilient to anxiety over life. So the prevalence, it's very common. This is very, very common. Like 19% of the population would suffer for it, and that's a huge number of people. I mean, think about it. 7% of children between 3 and 17 suffer for it, and most usually we get to see these symptoms happen before a person turns 21. This generally affects women more than men. This is a big issue, and it's only growing as that idea of chronic stress, that chronic stress with acute stress, with super stress, increases in our culture. But anxiety across the lifespan does change. So down at the bottom, you see childhood, adolescence, adult, and old age. And you see that fear around certain focal points, phobias, tend to decrease. We get perspective over that, and we recognize that it really isn't as dangerous as we think it is. Worry tends to decrease until you get to the middle place of adulthood, and then things like fear of falling happen. Worrying about your future, worrying about financial capacity, worrying about your memory, worrying about your health start to increase. PTSD does increase through the middle of adulthood, and this can be any kind of PTSD. This can be bullying in school, this can be sexual issues, this can be emotional abuse, it can be neglect. We'll talk about that in just a bit. But it changes over time, and it even changes over childhood. So that early on in childhood, you get these unsubstantiated fears around specific topics. And then that idea of separation issues, it moves into general anxiety disorder. And then you start to avoid people or situations where you're noticed. This is also that idea of being afraid to speak in front of folks. And ultimately, that can develop into panic disorder. And so you can see that anxiety over the course of time, if you don't work at it, if there isn't treatment for it, if your skills are not sufficient to meet the challenges that you face in life, it can deepen over time. So when we think about the factors that are predispose a person for anxiety, absolutely adverse childhood events are one of those big things. We were just listing some of those, but it could also be just isolation, abandonment, divorce, the death of a loved one, or a loved one moving away, being in an unsafe environment where you get the belief, the perceptual framework that you can walk outside and your life can end. That is a huge underlying level of chronic stress. Any one of these childhood events can predispose you to anxiety, but it also predisposes you to obesity and diabetes and heart disease. So working within childhood is so very important. And then the temperament of a child. I mean, sometimes people are just born and they're shy, and they really don't want to explore new things, and they avoid it. Some of those folks develop separation anxiety, but that may be related to some of their sort of genetic resiliency, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. If you have a family history of problems, and there's two things involved there. One is you may have some genetics that either keep you from receiving the neurotransmitter signal as substantially as you might, or maybe you break down your neurotransmitters too quickly, or maybe you don't create them as robustly as some others. But in addition to those genetic things that we usually can identify by looking at family history, are your siblings? Do they have any kind of mental health or mood challenges? What about your parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins? If there's a strong family history, then this says there's even more work for you to do because it may happen. And so you're going to have to develop better resiliency styles. So those resiliency styles, those coping styles, also can predispose somebody toward anxiety. So, for example, if something negative happens within the family system, and the way that one deals with it is either avoiding it or by sort of over responding to it, we can learn that that's the way to behave with those things any place in our life. And guess what? We don't even necessarily know that we're learning it, right? It's just sort of oozing into our perceptual framework because that's the way that the family system operates. So look to the family history, look to those coping styles. And then there are some things that happen in our physicality that can also be risk factors. And this can be changes in the brain. Now, stress and anxiety does change the brain. But if your amygdala might be working overtime, or your hippocampus, which is the place of memory, and the amygdala is the place of emotions and reactivity, the hippocampus is the place of memory. If that is smaller and not reacting well enough, that can predispose you to anxiety. And if the frontal cortex, which helps you make decisions to choose how you want to be, if that isn't working well enough, that can also be a problem. If your thyroid is overactive, you will feel anxious. And if you don't know that it's being caused by your thyroid, you can develop this dysfunctional approach to things that are happening in the world. If you have an arrhythmia, if your heart tends to beat quickly and fast, that also can make you feel as if you have anxiety. And then if your adrenal function is hyperactive, it absolutely will induce anxiety. So when you have anxiety, it's good to check on these things to make sure that these things aren't driving your experience. In your lifestyle, if you happen to be anxious, then caffeine, inflammatory foods, foods that you may be sensitive to, and those are often things like gluten or dairy and casein. It can be any other kind of thing, but often that's the one. If you have a lot of high fructose corn syrup, which is driving inflammation, simple carbs drive inflammation. And then for some folks, food additives and preservatives, they can be reactive to those things and they make you feel anxious. Now, if you withdraw quickly from caffeine, alcohol, or sugar, then you can also feel some anxiety. And if you happen to just sort of not be very active, have low movement, stay inside, and moving your thumbs with gaming really does not count as movement. So if you're low movement, you can be predisposed to developing anxiety. If you smoke, absolutely there's an association with an increased risk for anxiety. And then if you're on any medication to manage anxiety and you come off of it quickly, you can expect that you'll feel more anxious as that happens. Now, the anxiety is not the same as PTSD. So PTSD is a persistent dysfunction, and there are other characteristics. It's not the same as acute stress disorder. Remember, that comes and that goes, and it doesn't stay around for 6 months. Obsessive compulsive disorder used to be thought of as an anxiety disorder, but as we've learned more about neurotransmitters, we see that as a completely separate kind of disorder. It may be induced by fear or worry or trying to cope with things by having things in order, for example, or washing hands. An adjustment disorder just means life is difficult. You're feeling anxious. You may have some depressive symptoms, but it's just as a result of a life event. It's not something that's ongoing. Interestingly, depression occurs in about 60% of those with anxiety, and anxiety occurs in about the same number of folks with depression. They're not the same folks we're talking about, but there's a huge overlap in these two kinds of things because there's some similarities. So I wanted to show you all. So here in the middle are the things that are common: restlessness, agitation, problems with sleep, withdrawal, problems with concentration, feeling things in your body, having excessive worry. Over there on the left, you can see anxiety, trembling, heart rate issues, palpitation. So all of these things are activated, right? Feeling nervous, hypervigilant, panic, danger. Over on the depression side, these things are all associated with diminishing activation, sort of slowing down, turning in, going into a place of isolation, grief, sadness, helplessness, worthlessness. They are related, but they are different. And if you are anxious over a long period of time and your nutrition is not sufficiently strong to support your creation of the neurotransmitters you need to be resilient, right? as you need more, as you use more of your brain resources, then you have to give more nutrition in order to support that. If that's not happening, then anxiety over time can absolutely become depression. So we talked a little bit about these different neurotransmitters. These are the brain resources. These are the chemicals secreted in the brain. And very usually we talk about depression relative to serotonin. With noradrenaline, we talk about that relative to anxiety. And you can see right there in the middle is a place where the two come together. So some of the medications and some of the natural supplements that we'll list and talk about a little bit later are designed to boost your ability to make serotonin and noradrenaline. Some of the medications are designed to prevent those two neurotransmitters from breaking down, thereby giving you more relative amount of them. So we're looking at this intersection between noradrenaline and serotonin. Now, if you happen to have challenges with being compelled by different behaviors, being addicted to different behaviors, and this may be even food. It could be, salty snacks, or it could be sweets or sugars. Then dopamine is also involved. So when you're working with mood, you have to think about all three of these things. So let's talk a little bit about how anxiety actually comes in. And here we're talking about what happens in childhood, because you can see at the bottom, there are these sensitive developmental periods. So from 6 to 12 months, it's when our stress system really develops. So, when kids are screaming and crying and you say, oh, let them scream and cry it out, well, that may train them that the world is not a safe place and they can't rely on folks. So it's a balance. Got to work on that balance, with whatever your style of parenting is. At 15 months, it's language. And this is where our framework starts to become solidified, right? So, when we have this perceptual framework with how the world works, that first place of changing it from a concept into our reality is to speak it. The second place is when we start writing it down. And then it becomes more and more settled into the way we see the world. And then all the way up through 24 months is really when this place of attachment comes in. So these are sensitive periods. So when adversity happens early on, and we've talked about what those early childhood adverse events are, it leads to biological change. Now, here's where genetics comes in. And your self-decode may reveal that you have some of the SNPs related to these different genes. And they're genes related to how well the brain creates the peptides that help it change. That's BDNF. Or how it breaks down or works with those neurotransmitters. That's MAO. And how the body receives the information from those transmitters, and that's the 5-HTT. And there are others, but the idea is that just because you have those genes doesn't mean you'll be anxious. But it does mean that you may not be as resilient to adversity or stress. And so we think early in life when there's adversity and the child begins to show anxious symptoms, then there may be a genetic predisposition. And that changes how our genes work. That actually shortens the telomere. And the telomere is one of the things that's most closely related to resilience, and it's most closely related to longevity. And so we really want those telomeres to be as long as possible, but epigenetically they can be changed as a result of stress. Now, stress will reduce things like the hippocampus. We'll deal with that in just a minute. And it can change how the amygdala works. And all of this changes how our brain communicates to our adrenal glands. And then ultimately, even the idea of inflammation. So stress and anxiety can trigger the creation or the uncovering of an autoimmune disease that previously wasn't known. And the reason it was uncovered or came into existence can be stress alone. So in a little more detail, but we won't belabor it, when you have this predisposition for anxiety, look to the family history, look to the genetics, then a perceived threat from the environment is processed through that place of memory, the hippocampus, okay? And then it communicates with the amygdala, and that's what's supposed to happen. But if there is that early adverse event and our hippocampus and amygdala aren't working quite well, and our prefrontal cortex can't overcome that by our choices, right? Remember, we always will have choices, and we'll talk about that in just a bit. Then ultimately, it gets into our body. Our cortisol increases and our epinephrine increases. So the increase in cortisol is going to drive things like obesity and diabetes and inflammation. And the increase in epinephrine will drive that idea of a rapid heart rate, that idea of worry, that idea of sleeplessness and restlessness. And in the end, this is where anxiety disorders are diagnosed. So it's not just our mental health, though. And this looks at a more functional medicine, whole person view of what other things can contribute to anxiety. So we've already talked about the perceptual framework that you have and your ability to cope with it. But if your immune system and your stress system are hypercharged, and maybe that's from genetics, maybe that's because you have gut infections or small bowel overgrowth or a reaction to histamines and mast cell. Maybe you have a reaction to mold. Maybe you have Lyme disease. If your body is predisposed to that, then your gut, because it is non-functional, and your body, because it's dealing with these stressors from the outside, can actually produce inflammation molecules that cross the blood-brain barrier and work to irritate the brain. Literally, you are irritating the brain into anxiety. Now, the other things that can do that, absolutely. Obesity, having an imbalance in your insulin, having an imbalance in your glucose, all of those things can go and contribute to anxiety. So when we're talking about working with anxiety, we talked about looking for the hyperthyroidism or the high adrenal functioning. We talked about changes in the heart, but we also have to look to the gut. We have to look toward inflammation in the immune system and how well it's working. We have to look to our overall hormone balance, whether that's reproductive hormones, whether that's the metabolic hormones, the thyroid hormones, or the adrenal hormones. All of these things contribute to anxiety. So when we think about things functionally, it's never about hanging that diagnosis out there and seeing if we can target it with something. It's about understanding all of the drivers, because that diagnosis is a result of everything filling up the cup and then overflowing. The overflowing gives you the diagnosis. We want to stop the cup from being filled however we can. So let's think about how we react to our thoughts and feelings. And remember, our thoughts and feelings are our perceptual framework. Some we've chosen, some we've been given by our family, some we've been given by society. And often we don't even know it until we run up to a problem with them. So when you talk about your own securities, and very often that's something like, am I good enough? If that happens and you're thinking a lot, am I good enough? Then that drives worry and fear. Always check to see whether or not that may not be correct. Remember, our minds create stories with very few facts, and they try to convince us that these stories are correct. When we feel like the stories are correct and they become our expectations, and whatever happens doesn't meet those expectations, by the way, those expectations and stories are practically always not real, then that's when we start to have worry and fear. So this idea of desperately holding on to those expectations, those plans, or holding on to the past, being stuck in what you would have done, should have done, could have done, or how you were not good enough to do whatever it was in the past. So then there are these beliefs that we have. For example, I can't do anything about it. That's just how I am. That's a self-limiting belief. Trying to constantly get validation. Again, what does this come back to? Am I good enough? Am I good enough? And that fear of uncertainty is often a reflection of feeling like you need to control the circumstances so that you're not surprised by anything and that you're beyond reproach. So we need to think about these different ways of thinking, these different held beliefs, and see if any of them really can be maybe shifted a bit. So in more detail, these kinds of thoughts and beliefs aren't really helpful to ultimately be able to cope with anxiety. When we talk about the anxiety all the time, when we have that why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? It means that we really don't want to recognize that the anxiety exists. We keep trying to push it away. When we're asking others to help us feel better, right? I mean, again, that means that, this idea of am I enough? That idea of certainty, we mentioned that. Blaming genetics, I have no control over this. I am helpless in the face of this. That's that self-limitedness. When you accommodate anxiety and enable it, and I know that's sort of a weird kind of a thing, but again, it's pushing the anxiety away instead of just saying, okay, I feel uncomfortable. You don't need to name it. I feel uncomfortable with X, Y, or Z, whatever it is. And we'll do a technique in just a minute to help with that. That safety behavior, again, you're trying to control the situation in order that nothing happen. Justifying the worries instead of just saying, okay, I have this feeling. You want to rationalize it and then try to control it. Trying to get rid of the anxiety. This is really not about having the anxiety go away. It is about saying, I can feel uncomfortable with whatever and still choose whatever it is I would choose to do in the moment. We'll do a technique. So having that toxic positivity, thinking happy, being happy, saying you're happy. When there is anxiety, the brain actually releases compounds that try to help to resolve it. And one of the most important ones is oxytocin. Oxytocin is released whenever you're with people. So one of the things that maybe doesn't really help anxiety is the idea of separating and isolating yourself, right? That's an accommodating behavior. You want to be around people, if you can be, so that oxytocin can kick in. It's one of the most anti-anxiety molecules the body produces. And then rush, always having to do things, always having to do it really fast. All of that ultimately can worsen the anxiety. So I want to do a brief technique right now, just for a few minutes. And I want you to put your fingers together, just your thumb and your forefinger. Now pass it across each other, taking a deep breath, but you're focused just on the sensation. Bring your finger and your thumb and your forefinger apart ever so slightly. You don't want to feel the pads of your fingers, but you want to just feel the fingerprints, the ridges of the fingerprints bumping across each other. Feel that bumping. It's fascinating, right? That you can do that. Go slow. Breathe into it. Just breathe into it. Now, this is the pause. In this pause, you can have that sensation, and you can recognize anything else that's going on. Maybe it's a thought or a feeling or a sensation in your body or a memory, whatever it is. Now, in this, focus the sensation. Try to just bring your attention back to the sensation and recognize that thought or feeling exists. And in this moment, this present moment, choose whatever you will do next. Whatever you will do next. Now, You can keep doing that. And you can do this when you're having a meeting. You can do this when you're talking to family. You can do this anytime, right? You can just do this.
Very cool.
The problem
Very
with
cool.
thoughts and feelings is that if they hook you and reel you to the past or reel you to the future, then you're not living in the present. You're living in that place of shame or guilt or worry or fear. And those behaviors and thoughts we just were discussing are naturally arising as a result of that. If you can bring yourself back into the moment, pause, notice, and choose using the sensation of your fingerprints bouncing across each other, then it can put you more into this moment and give you a chance to make other choices. And that is critically important. Now, some of these things I'll just let you look at, but there are other ways to look at anxiety, and we can look at it from the chakra system. And when we look at the chakra system, you can see that there are these different issues that come up in the different chakras. And, they may be family issues, childhood issues, they may be relationship issues, they may be trust issues. But you can have different kinds of Ayurvedic work or energy work done on these centers to help release what may be stored in your body. And there are other ways of working. Let's see, sorry about that. There are other ways of working with anxiety, and this is using auricular acupuncture. And so you can actually take a little ink pen or ballpoint pen and stimulate these different areas, especially that area up the top called Shinmin. It's the master spirit point, and it helps to balance the sympathetic and parasympathetic, the relaxation and the excitation system. The kidney is up underneath that ridge, and the sympathetic point is behind that ridge in the ear. So that's why they have the white dots there. But you can stimulate these points yourself to help with anxiety. And then you can do some tapping, which is emotional freedom technique. And so as you tap, you would say, even though I'm uncomfortable with X, I completely love and accept myself just the way I am. So you tap on the eyebrow, on the top of the head, a few times, breathing deeply, repeating that to yourself. And then right here on the bridge of the nose, and then on the side of the eye, under the eye, under the nose by the philtrum, right here under the mouth by the chin, under the collarbone when it comes together to the sternum. And then in the sore spot right here, just below that. Then underneath the arms, and then the karate chop right here. Now, in doing this, we are using acupuncture. This is an acupuncture-based approach. With tapping, you're stimulating the points by tapping, and that can help with anxiety. So as we are moving into this, I have to pause and say, I'm getting into the intervention part, Mary and AJ. Do we want to save this for another time and have questions now, or do you want me to keep going? I figured this would be more than one.
What do you think, Dr. Mary? The intervention stuff's kind of cool. But
can we do another 5 minutes, Henri, and sort of go into a few pieces, and we could save some for another time if we don't get through it?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think you'll probably answer our questions in doing so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's cool. As we talk about how to change your brain, then again, I'm not going to go through all of these with detail, but use it or lose it. So what does that mean? That means that when you're thinking about anxiety and it rushes down and becomes a panic kind of a thing, it takes over all of your thoughts and all of your ability to respond, then you have wandered into a rut. Because it's there. It's there because it's been used. It's been reinforced over time. That's that use it or lose it thing. The more you use a neurological pathway, the stronger it gets. So you have to be willing to have the experience and to say, okay, I know where this goes. Like, for example, when you experience anxiety the next time, go back and sit down and say, what did I miss? Did I miss an opportunity to pause, notice, and choose? Because I went right up to the edge of the precipice, the edge of the cliff, and then went right over and slid down the canyon. So it's about being willing to have the experience to recognize, right? To be able to observe and recognize that warning sign that says, you know where this goes, take a moment. Do the pause, notice, and choose. Refocus on that sensation or whatever you choose to do so that you can choose differently. And the more you do that, the less strong that canyon will be and the stronger your resiliency will be. And you need to practice that pause, notice, and choose when you don't actually need it, because you just have to practice it for it to get better. Use it, it will improve. Repetition matters and importance matters. That's intensity. You need to make these resiliency efforts as important as your body is convinced that the other behaviors might do it in. Do it over and over. Focus your attention on things that give you energy. And when you are given energy, work to bring it into those energy centers that we just talked about. Music and nature, sunlight, gratitude, meditation, movement, yoga, breath work, being in community, eating whole foods. You see the energy takers, as much as possible, focus your time and energy around those energy givers. And so when we talk about it, there are some specific strategies, and cognitive behavioral therapy is one of those things. It helps us recognize the beliefs, that perceptual framework within which we live. We may not even know what they are. Recognize whenever there is that canyon experience of sliding down into anxiety, you can be guaranteed that there's some kind of thought or belief that exists on that edge that ultimately you can choose, you can notice, you can learn, and you can choose differently. Cognitive behavioral therapy helps you do that. When you're in the moment, when you're practicing mindfulness, then it decreases worry and rumination because you're behaving in this moment. Worry and rumination are living in the future, taking your life into the future. It does nothing to help the future, because every action that can help the future is done right here in this moment. And it reduces that adrenal, that hormonal response, and helps to normalize how your nervous system works and how your brain regions work. It can heal your brain. This is very important as we look down the future in our lives toward brain and memory health. So the vagus nerve is the parasympathetic part of the nervous system. Sympathetic is when the noradrenaline and the adrenaline, drive your heart rate and all those things, get your stomach all upset, cause you to breathe very shallowly. The vagus nerve does all of the opposite things, helps to calm your nervous system, helps to break that anxiousness. Deep diaphragmatic breathing, extremely important. Breathing from your gut. If you put a hand on your chest and a hand on your abdomen, and you take a deep breath, see where you breathe from. If that upper hand is moving, that's a shallower breath. See if you can focus just to move, just to breathe, and have the bottom hand move. Now, if that's difficult for you, maybe somebody can come behind you and just put their hands on your shoulders. Sometimes that's all it takes. Or lie down flat on a bed with a book, a large book, a Bible, whatever, on your abdomen. And just breathe so that your abdomen makes that book rise and fall. That's a diaphragmatic breath. If you like cold therapy, cryotherapy, cold plunges work. Using heart math, heart rate variability works. Gratitude practice. Gargling. literally gargling with lemon water can stimulate the vagus nerve, as can humming or singing. And then acupuncture can help increase vagus nerve activity. So I don't know that we have a whole lot of time to go over this. I do want to mention a few things. Perfectionism is anxiety and waiting if it doesn't create anxiety already. So please watch out for this in yourself and watch out for it in your adolescence. And also be mindful of social media. Social media as a comparison tool, it seems like that may be the only thing it does these days. And it convinces folks that they aren't good enough. They always wish that they would be somebody else. So if that's happening to you, please consider to get out into nature instead of getting into social media nature. So in nutrition, avoid any sensitive foods, preservatives, inflammatory foods. Make sure you're as low carb as possible. Make sure you're as anti-inflammatory as possible. Include foods high in tryptophan, which are milk and poultry. Include foods high in vitamin D, which are mushrooms. And rotate your diet as much as possible. Don't eat the same thing more than 2 or 3 times a week. When we're talking about botanicals, some of the ones that work best for anxiety are things like kava kava, valerian root, skullcap, orange blossom, lemon balm, and rhodiola. And when we're talking about supplements, 5-HTP helps to build serotonin. EPA and DHA are omega-3s that help to reduce inflammation. L-theanine and GABA support GABA in the brain, which is a relaxing neurotransmitter. Others that can be useful include magnesium and glycine. And then just recognizing that there are many different kinds of antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications that will help with your symptoms. So today we've learned drop in, tapping, pause, notice, and choose. The thing I want to mention finally is shaking. Now, if the anxiety is in your body, the heart rate is going fast, you're feeling that imminent sense of doom, and you know it's not a heart attack because you've been to the emergency room several times for this, you know it's just anxiety, then you can't meditate it out. Can't at that point pause, notice, and choose it out. You gotta do what the antelope on the Great Plains do when the cheetah just got their back hoof and the antelope got away. They get away, but then what do? They shake it out. They literally shake it out. And that's something that you can do as well. Find a safe place, spend 2 minutes, you can do it to music or not to music, and literally shake everything. Your head, your shoulders, your hands, your elbows, your knees, your hips, your feet, shake everything. Shake it for 2 minutes. You will feel that release. You may feel lightheaded because there's a vast difference between being in that relaxed place and being in that anxious place. And shifting it, whether with acupuncture, whether with shaking, can cause you to feel differently. Recognize that that different feeling is actually a feeling of relaxation, and you have reset your anxiety. Do you all have any questions? Thank you very much.
Amazing stuff. Wow. So much learning. Thank you so much. Let's see here. I think we're doing pretty good. You answered a lot of the questions. And I think, like you said, the intervention at the end was what a lot of people were looking for in terms of, okay, I have this idea that I have anxiety, but what can I do in real time? And I guess one question I had in terms of the interventions was, so you say you got to practice a lot, right? And practice as the anxiety comes. For someone who's more like high anxiety, do you want them to practice this every time? How many times a day should they practice? What's kind of the recommendation
That's
there?
That's a really good question. Now, when you practice it, please practice it not just when you're anxious, because that's when you need it. So, like you don't expect a person who's ever played baseball to go up to the home plate and hit a home run. Right. They have to practice a lot. They have to practice lots of different pitches, lots of different swings, and then they get good at it. So same thing with this. You can't expect these techniques to snap, they're perfect and they work the first time. You have to practice them. You have to develop that neurological pathway so that when you have the chance to recognize and choose, you can go down this other direction, right? So practice it. Now, I suggest folks to practice pause, notice, and choose for a minute. If you can do it every hour while you're awake. Now, what does that mean? That means that you're outside and you look at a tree. Well, look at that tree and really observe it and notice it as you're practicing your pause, notice, and choose. You're talking to your spouse or loved one. While you're doing it, really be in the moment. Practice pause, notice, and choose, and talk to them. They may tell you they feel more heard than usual. And that would make sense, right? Because your mind is focused on them, not on the many other things that could be running through it. So when I say practice it, it doesn't mean that you have to do something other than your daily activity. It means that you're doing your daily activity a little differently. The more you practice it, probably the less you'll have to use it, but the more it will be able to be used. Whether that's tapping, pause, notice, and choose, dropping in, whether that's the idea of being willing to have these thoughts and experiences without having to push them away, without having to make them go away, but by refocusing on what's happening in the moment so that they can be there and not capture your attention and draw it away from what's important. I hope that answered the question.
That was great.
Thank you, Henri. I have a question as well, which actually is the same question as coming in from the audience. But first, I just wanted to thank you. That was absolutely wonderful. I learned a lot. I love the functional approach. Yeah. I mean, it's beautiful because you really incorporate the many avenues through which signal comes to generate anxiety. We hear so much about the sort of psychological stuff, the emotional underpinnings, but you brought in the biology as well, the genetics. It was amazing. So thank you. And then of course the practical stuff. I love dancing and I shake a lot when I dance. So that I guess subconsciously I was doing that. I didn't realize that shaking was a thing. It's cool. Anyway, yeah, thank you. I would love to ask, this came in from the audience as well. Could you please talk about how to get better at sitting with and processing anxiety when you feel like you're prone to distraction and avoidant behaviors?
That's a great question. That is definitely where willingness needs to come in. So the first step is willingness. You got to be willing to sit with it, and you have to be okay with having it. Right? That's critical. It's not like this is all about making it go away. This is about being able to be as strong in the moment as you previously might have been trying to get anxiety to go away. So, first of all, willingness. You have to give yourself permission to be able to succeed, to be able to not succeed, and to be uncomfortable. Because the process is about being able to sit with that uncomfortability and still focus on what's important. Now, you can do it through breath work. You can do it through counting. You can do it through meditation or prayer. You can do it through gazing at something. You can do it through that pause, notice, and choose, which gives you a sensation to focus on. And very often, for the first however many tens or hundreds of times, you'll find that that hook still has you and is still going to try to reel you out of the moment. And you have to be willing to come back and refocus. That's the key thing. Be willing and refocus. The mind will do what the mind does. And it will always do what minds do, make stories out of next to nothing to convince you they're real. You have to be able to be willing to have it and come back and refocus. Come back and refocus. It's amazing as you try this, how many times your mind will wander onto different issues. Maybe the ones that you started with, maybe totally different ones. By the time you're done, it may have started and gone with what you were focused on and then jump to something else and then something else and end up on a totally different planet of concepts, whatever they may be. Whenever you recognize that you're no longer focused on what you've chosen, the fingertips, if you're doing pause, notice, and choose, whenever you recognize that, that's when you are willing to come back to it. You come back to it. You refocus. If you're practicing this for a minute, you'll be amazed at how many times your mind may wander and you have to come back to refocus. But that's the practice. That's the use it. That's the improve it. That's the repetition. That's the importance.
Beautiful. Thank you. Yes. Repetition. Amazing. Thank you. I see we're at time. So just again, thank you, Dr. Henri. That was absolutely wonderful. I'm sure everybody enjoyed that very much. Thank you so much for your time and enlightening us. Yeah. Thank you. Greatly appreciated. And if you love this content and you want to see the slides to dig in deeper, in the next few days, we'll be sending out an email with a recording of this presentation and a copy of Dr. Henri's slides, along with the opportunity to book a free consultation call with us at Maka. If you feel like you have questions or concerns, or if you're experiencing symptoms, or you simply want to learn more about precision wellness or managing anxiety, please do get in touch. We're happy to have a one-on-one call with you and talk things through to see if we can help you. And finally, we look forward to seeing you at our next salon on August 21st, featuring the brilliant Dr. Sam Suete, who will be sharing with us on the importance of how to use light as medicine. So details on that to come in our social channels and our newsletter. So please follow us there or subscribe if you haven't already. Our handle is @Maka Health Tech.